saw the sign advertising the Marsden Hartley show outside of the New Mexico Museum of Art on May 24th. It was a Saturday, the day of the Aspen Santa Fe Ballet Spring Recital at the Linsick, which both of my daughters were performing in. My knowledge of Hartley is somewhat limited, other than knowing that he was an American modernist painter. I've loved oil painting more than any other medium ever since I stood in front of the Rothkos at the Tate Britain when I was 20 years old. I made a note to come back on a day I could go without my 3 kids. Because it was already summer break, with May 22nd having been the last day of school, I typically would not have a day without them until school began again. Except my mom was in town. She was there not to take care of her grandchildren, but me, her 48-year-old child. I was, and still am, a cancer patient. The day I was able to see the Hartley show was after my husband and I went to see an OB/GYN about getting my ovaries removed. It was May 30th, my birthday. I felt confident that I wanted the surgery so I could avoid the hormone treatments meant to suppress the estrogen fueling my cancer. Even though it's only 2.5 months later, what I was dealing with then seems light years away from now. I had at that time completed 3 rounds of chemo with 1 more to go. I've since completed chemo and had a double mastectomy and lumpectomy, with radiation still ahead. I no longer want my ovaries removed if it means another surgery. I'm tired. After the OB/GYN, my husband came home and I went back out to the museum, not telling anyone where I was going. I wanted to be in a darkened room with purposeful spotlight shining on someone else's creativity, with no one knowing where I was. I parked on Lincoln in front of Design Warehouse, and once inside the hushed museum, bought my ticket. It's stupid how little art I've seen since moving to Santa Fe 9 years ago. My life used to be filled with it. I was an art major in college and a painter in my early 20s, before making a shift to getting my master's degree in art history, thinking it was more practical, and moved to New York and worked in a contemporary gallery, then a museum, and lastly, for a sculptor in her studio. When my husband and I came to Santa Fe, we had our 6-month-old daughter with us, and I was already pregnant with our second. In another 2 years, we would welcome our third. Art was no longer the priority. The Hartley show was centered on his travels. There was a large map on the wall of the places he spent time in. Maine, of course, but also New York, Bermuda, France, and Germany, and a brief stint in New Mexico. As I gazed inside the cases that held some personal items, a paint box, travel handbags, a watch, currency, was there a passport? I felt a vague sense of jealousy and even wonder at his freedom. The sense of being untethered to do as one wishes while cultivating a career. But it was a grass is greener idea. A gay man in the early 20th century who lost his mother at age 14, Hartley had his own constraints and ails to deal with. What is it like to be a painter and want to paint like Cézanne, I've sometimes wondered? To attempt the turn of flatness to depth on mountains, a challenge on perception and beauty, oranges that both seem heavy and like they will roll off of the table at any moment. It seems impossible for anyone but Cézanne to accomplish. Hartley's Mont Sainte-Victoire from 1927 suggests Cézanne, but also the distortion of German Expressionism, with garish oranges, yellows, and greens, a bright red claw-like shape descending down a deep blue mountain. The Berlin series, painted 15 years earlier, were some of my favorites in the show. They evoked another artist of his time, Hilma af Klint, a symbolist artist, although she arguably, now that we've been able to see her paintings, was a master of her own transcendent style. In his series, Hartley shows an interest in Native American imagery with the inclusion of an eagle in one painting, a horse in another, setting his works apart from the Europeans. Hartley was in New Mexico for only 2 years, from 1918 to 1920, but the landscapes he portrayed could have been painted yesterday. For those of us who love New Mexico, rapid change is appalling. I recently saw a young man wearing a shirt at the Rail Yard Farmers Market that had the shape of New Mexico on it, with the words, "Don't tell anyone," inside its border. I am part of this change, my husband and I coming from New York City, but I can justify my move here and that my grandparents on my father's side spent 30 years in New Mexico, splitting their time between Angel Fire and Truth or Consequences. I grew up in a household in Minnesota that understood the draw of this place, and those two towns, while vastly different from one another, held an almost folklore appeal in their beauty and strangeness, and not just from their names alone. Hartley's New Mexico paintings don't show the signature blue sky, but rather trap the landscape's colors between the clouds and the dirt. To appreciate New Mexico's landscape is to really study it, to let the subtleties of its colors unfold slowly. The green from a good rain season may seem bright to those of us living here, but would never to a person visiting from the East Coast. Hartley painted New Mexico while living in Berlin, depending on his memory of the place, calling the series Recollections. He said of the paintings, "They are monochromatic almost, black, white, umber, or Venetian red and green. The first time in my life I've ever done what I've always aspired to, a black and white painting." This quote was next to a horizontal picture with a grayish sky and long flat clouds, greens and browns resting on the surface of the ground, and an ochre color mirrored in the sky. The low-lying mountains in the background act as the horizon. The painting is not black and white, of course, in the same way that New Mexico is not monochromatic. I was not feeling well while I was at the museum, and I looked it with a shaved head and a mask covering my nose and mouth. With stage 2 cancer, the parts of the illness that make you feel the worst are the treatments. The chemo accumulated as the doctor said it would, and my muscles had started to feel weak. Even walking up a flight of stairs was painful and made me out of breath. It's nice to be past that phase, and in some ways also the sympathetic gazes. Thankfully, few structures in New Mexico have stairs, and the ones that do provide elevators. Still, in a small, stubborn effort to deny the side effects of chemo, I opted to take the staircase up to see the Ken Price show, who spent his time between Los Angeles and Taos, in a portfolio collaboration with the LA Taos and now France-based poet Harvey Mudd. The show was engaging in a more immediate way. The city of LA as a backdrop to Price's noir-like imagery, Harvey's poetry rooted in environmentalism, in a city that seems to assail nature at every turn. The two shows were so different that I won't compare them. For now, I'll end at Hartley. I kept thinking of other painters while I was in the show. Cézanne, Ove Klimt, Emile Nolde, Odilon Redon. Hartley painted before, during, and after these other artists, but all were working within the same stretch of some 50 years. In those pre-internet days, news from letters and images of paintings moved slowly across the Atlantic. It's fun to think of the idea of the zeitgeist, some sort of supernatural power carrying ideas that reverberated across populations to put form and imagery to a thought, allowing culture and new ideas to march on. I returned home to my family, my mother wondering where I was, and I still didn't tell her. With so many people orbiting around my life and my cancer, it felt good to keep something to myself. Together, my mom and I cooked my birthday dinner: mussels in a garlic sauce, roasted carrots with tahini and pistachios, an Iranian spinach yogurt dip, and a German chocolate cake my husband got from Chocolate Maven. More than any other birthday, I had a feeling of contentedness. Time has a clever way of feeling like it's standing still when you're in the middle of an illness. Except, of course, time doesn't stand still. My next and last chemo would be in 3 days, now come and gone, just like my birthday. The Hartley show is over, the paintings packed up and returned to their owners, perhaps some hanging as part of its permanent collection, with others put into storage to be seen again at some future date.